I want to thank Leader Ort introducing me to Mr. Richard Ellenbogen, President of Allied Converters. He is an engineer who will be speaking on common sense government, and I thank him for his time from his busy schedule coming and joining us today. So, Mr. Ellenbogen, I appreciate it so much. And just like what Leader Ort said, there's no affiliation to any kind of outside entity or anything like that. He is just, I don't even want to say if you're a Republican or a Democrat, but we don't get into that. But this man is just a concerned New York State citizen. Thank you so much.
Actually, which will make everybody behind me cringe. I hope they're not armed. I am not a Republican. None of you have a knife, do you? No. I'm an engineer and not a politician, so I have a different perspective on New York State's energy plan than most of the people in Albany. It's more about the science and less about the money, but having been an engineer at Bell Laboratories in their power systems lab, and having run my own manufacturing business for over 4 decades, I have a fundamental understanding that without the money, you can't do the science. I decarbonized my business and my home 2 decades ago with planning going back to when Bill Clinton was president. This morning, I drove to Albany from Westchester in a Tesla that is 6 years old. I provided large amounts of data from my research gratis to the Public Service Commission of New York State that was used to, as the basis of a utility conference on energy savings on their transmission system. And they achieved major savings on their transmission system, about the equivalent of adding a 240 megawatt solar array to the state. Con Ed has a renewable interconnection solution named after my company as a result of my filing a tariff petition against them to promote easier interconnection of renewables. I have been living the electric lifestyle for 2 decades, which is where New York State is trying to go. While the state's intentions are good, and I would love to see the state's energy plan succeed, unfortunately, I can safely say that New York State's plan is a disaster waiting to happen because the math and the physics just don't work. I've been speaking with stakeholders and policymakers at the state for over 4 years now, since early 2019. I provided numbers-dense presentations to state engineers and state regulators. During multiple meetings, they didn't dispute any of my data. I showed them how the energy generated by their planned renewable energy installations would not support the level of electrification that they were about to mandate. The only response that I received was that they would install renewables faster than I was calculating, except I was using their installation rates. I told them that they were ignoring reality because the plan was going to run into money issues, NIMBY issues, and the Jones Act. Very important one, the Jones Act. Anyone that has actually installed energy systems and had to get them approved and running would be aware of these real-world hurdles. However, based upon my readings, it is apparent that most of the designers of this plan have never done anything beyond pontificating from behind a desk and have a minuscule comprehension of the utility system. If it were otherwise, they never would have proposed this. I have also been appalled at the reporting on energy issues from many media outlets that doesn't correctly reflect scientific and engineering reality. The press has been misled by interest groups and those engaged in self-deception. However, the net effect is that we have a misinformed public driving politicians to do things that don't hold up under scientific scrutiny and that cannot be realistically achieved. 4 years after I addressed the issue with the state, the renewable installations are falling behind what they had projected and what I used in my analysis. The warnings that I gave them in March 2019 are all coming true. This is because interconnection costs are higher than projected, and there are not enough engineers available to do the analysis to ensure that new generation can be interconnected without causing faults on the utility system. This is not as straightforward as just dropping some solar panels down and then just plugging them in. 4 years ago, the math said at the rate of installation, there would not be enough renewable generation to support the state plan for at least 7 decades, 50 years after the state's 2040 date. That is even more true now. Late last year, the NYISO issued a warning that the downstate utility system would be under stress starting in 2023 and going to 2033. It's actually going to go a lot longer than that if this plan keeps going forward. The farther along the downstate building electrification proceeds, the more that stress will increase. Additionally, any renewable generation system is going to need large amounts of battery storage to support the grid when there is no sun or wind. The primary material in these batteries is lithium. Since the summer of 2019, lithium costs have increased at least 600%, despite the recent price drop earlier this year, and lithium prices are expected to rise another 15% this year. New York State recently released their 6 gigawatt energy storage report. Beyond the fact that the name of the document is an oxymoron because 6 gigawatts is a measure of power and not energy, buried on page 94 of the 104 pages is a statement that 1,000 plus hours of storage will be needed. When I researched energy storage costs about 2 years ago, the cost for utility-grade storage was $283 per kilowatt hour. Extrapolating the storage cost using only 4 gigawatts, not even the 6 gigawatts, for 1,000 hours that 2 years ago cost, yields a bill of $1.2 trillion. That's not a mistake, $1 trillion. Except the report also says that recent costs in New York State for installed storage have been $567 per kilowatt hour, which increases the bill to $2.3 trillion. If we use the full 6 gigawatts mentioned in the title of the report, that cost rises to $3.4 trillion in a state with an annual budget of about $230 billion. So the storage costs alone, without any renewable generation or grid improvements, could be over 15 times the state's annual budget. And the present batch of batteries would only last about 10 years. There is no way to generate tax revenue to overcome that size shortfall. For that kind of money, you could build enough nuclear plants to electrify the entire Northeast United States that would last 7 to 8 times as long as the batteries and that would have a higher reliability. The recently passed Federal Inflation Reduction Act allocated $340 billion for renewable projects for the entire United States, 1/10 of New York's projected storage costs. The state plan is short on labor, energy, land, generation, and grid capacity, public support, and money to be able to achieve what they want in the stated time frame. Further, New York State's plan is not revolutionary. Germany has been trying the same thing since 1990 and has failed at it magnificently. After over 30 years, they have only decarbonized 34% of their electric grid. They state that their grid is 42% renewable, but 8% of that is wood combustion that has a higher carbon footprint than coal and twice that of natural gas. The energy costs are twice that of France next door. Germany has recently had to restart several shuttered coal plants to offset the lost energy of their shuttered nuclear plants that, according to the 1990 plan, would no longer be needed by this year. That has not been the case. Keep in mind that this energy shortfall is occurring without having enacted vehicle electrification that New York State has mandated in 2035. They have recently acknowledged by their actions that the plan is having major issues, and in late November signed a deal to import 2 million metric tons of liquid natural gas from Qatar over the next 15 years. California has embarked upon a similar plan and is having major issues with it, and as a result is suffering from rolling blackouts and power failures during times of peak load. California says they are 60% GHG free on their in-state utility system, while not acknowledging that they have had to import large amounts of coal generation from out of state to replace the shuttered gas generation and doubled the carbon footprint related to that energy. They are acting as though GHG emissions are cognizant of political borders on a map. 2 years ago, energy and failures in Texas during cold weather resulted in between 300 and 700 deaths and $195 billion in property damage. Utility failures in New York State during extremely cold weather will yield similar results. Climate change is real. I was fundamentally aware of that back in the 1990s when I started designing the systems for my home and business. The state's effort to do something that has the previously documented issues is going to fail and will also not reduce greenhouse gas problems. Beyond that, it is also going to divert resources from projects that could actually help to deliver significant carbon reductions at a much lower cost and could also be implemented far more quickly. The clock is ticking. Our children are counting on us to get this right the first time, which will not happen if the state keeps chasing unrealistic fantasies. Renewable generation can be used to help reduce fossil fuel combustion, but it will not be able to support the state's generation needs for many decades. The U.S. Department of Energy has acknowledged this. Why are we trying to duplicate failed programs from other jurisdictions because the alternatives don't meet the standard of ideological purity? Even though the alternative solutions will work as well or better, while also being less expensive, they are being dismissed out of hand. No one wants to combust any more fossil fuels than is absolutely necessary. But this quest for the perfect is going to fail miserably, and the end result is going to be both a public health crisis brought on by a lack of energy and an economic crisis resulting from energy costs that will make it impossible to live and work in New York State. Thank you.
Senator Matera is going to be handing out a quiz now for all of you to answer. I want to thank Richard for, his knowledge, because I can tell you that clearly someone like him has not been consulted or involved in crafting these proposals. Because if he were, they either ignored him or he wasn't involved. And I think he will tell you, again, these policies, he doesn't come at it from a partisan standpoint. He comes at it from a science and practical standpoint of somebody who knows what he's talking about.